Great evening, classmates. Great evening, ma'am. I, Jonna Crisita Payan, and Miss Tordet Eucor will discuss about research ethics. In this topic, we are going to explore the ethics of scientific research in psychology, and we begin with a general framework for thinking about the ethics of scientific research in psychology. Then we'll look at some specific ethical codes for biomedical and behavioral researchers, focusing on the ethics code of the American Psychological Association. Finally, we are going to consider some practical tips for conducting ethical research in psychology and also tackle several ethical issues that arise in psychological research, including ones that affect research participants, the scientific community, and society more generally. Before starting to discuss about the moral foundations of ethical research, I will first discuss a study in a 1998 medical journal, since we are going to use this study as an example for the rest of the topics of our discussion. So some of the topics, this will be the example. In 1998, a medical journal called The Lancet published an article of interest to many psychologists. The researchers claimed to have shown a statistical relationship between receiving the combined measles, mumps, and rubella or MMR vaccine and the development of autism, suggesting furthermore that the vaccine might even cause autism. So, one result of this report was that many parents decided not to have their children vaccinated, which of course put them at higher risk of measles, mumps, and rubella. However, follow up studies by other researchers consistently failed to find a statistical relationship between the MMR vaccine and autism, and it is generally accepted now that there is no relationship between the two, the MMR vaccine and autism. In addition, several more serious problems with the original research were uncovered, and among them were that the lead researcher stood to gain financially from his conclusions because he had patented a competing measles vaccine. He had also used biased methods to select and test his research participants and had used unapproved and medically unnecessary procedures on them. And in 2010, the Lancet retracted the article, and the lead researcher's right to practice medicine was revoked. What is research ethics? Research ethics are moral principles that guide researchers to conduct and report research without deception or intention to harm the participants of the study or members of the society as a whole. So, Many kinds of ethical issues can arise in scientific research, especially when it involves human participants. For this reason, it is very useful to begin with a general framework for thinking through these issues. Table 3.1 presents a framework for thinking through the ethical issues involved in psychological research. The rows of Table 3.1 represent four general moral principles that apply to scientific research. First, weighing risk against benefits. Second, acting responsibly and with integrity. Third, seeking justice. And fourth, respecting people's rights and dignity. These principles are adopted from those in the American Psychological Association Ethics Code. And the columns of Table 3.1 represent three groups of people that are affected by scientific research. First, the research participants. Second, the scientific community. And third, society more generally. The idea is that a thorough consideration of the ethics of any research project must take into account how each of the four moral principles applies to each of the three groups of people. Let us look more closely at each of the moral principles and how they can be applied to each of the three groups. The first principle is weighing risk against benefits. Scientific research in psychology can be ethical only if its risks are outweighed by its benefits. Among the risks to research participants are that a treatment might fail to help or even be harmful, and a procedure might result in physical or psychological harm, and their right to privacy might be violated. Among the potential benefits are receiving a helpful treatment, learning about psychology, experiencing the satisfaction of contributing to scientific knowledge, and receiving money or course credit for participating. Scientific research can have risks and benefits to the scientific community and to society too. A risk to science is that if a research question is uninteresting or a study is poorly designed, then the time, money, and effort spent on that research could have been spent on more productive research. A risk to society is that research results could be misunderstood or misapplied with harmful consequences. So, the research study that I had discussed kanina, the Lancet, in a medical journal that mistakenly linked the measles, mumps, and rubella or MMR vaccine to autism resulted in both of these kinds of harm. Of course, the benefits of scientific research to science and society are that it advances scientific knowledge and can contribute to the welfare of society. It is not necessarily easy to weigh the risk of research against its benefits because the risk and benefits may not be directly comparable. For example, it is common for the risk of a study to be primarily to the research participants, but the benefits primarily for science or society. Consider, for example, the Stanley Milgram's original study on obedience to authority. I think you are familiar to this one. So, in Stanley Milgram's original study on obedience to authority, the participants were told that they were taking part in a study on the effects of punishment on learning and were instructed to give electric shocks to another participant each time that participant responded incorrectly on a learning task. So, with each incorrect response, the shock became stronger, eventually causing the other participant, who was in the next room, to protest, complain about his heart, scream in pain, and finally fall silent and stop responding. So, if the first participant hesitated or expressed concern, the researchers said that he must continue, but in reality, the other participant was a helper of the researcher who pretended to be a real participant. And the protest, complaints, and screams that the real participant heard were an audio recording that was activated when he flipped the switch to administer the shocks. So, the surprising result of his study was that most of the real participants continued to administer the shocks right through the protests, complaints, and screams. Although this is considered one of the most important results in psychology, with implications for understanding events like the Holocaust. It came at the cost of producing severe psychological stress in the research participants. And this research is considered unethical by today's standards. The second moral principle is acting responsibly and with integrity. Researchers must act responsibly and with integrity. This means carrying out their research in a thorough and competent manner, meeting their professional obligations, and being truthful. Acting with integrity is important because it promotes trust, which is an essential element of all effective human relationships. Participants must be able to trust that researchers are being honest with them, for example, about what the study involves, and will keep their promises, for example, to maintain confidentiality, and will carry out their research in ways that maximize benefits and minimize risk. An important issue here is the use of deception. Some research questions, such as what I have discussed about the Milgram study, are difficult or impossible to answer without deceiving research participants. Thus, acting with integrity can conflict with doing research that advances scientific knowledge and benefits society. So, we will consider how psychologists generally deal with this conflict shortly. The scientific community and society must also be able to trust that researchers have conducted their research thoroughly and competently and that they have reported on it honestly. Again, the example at the beginning of the discussion, which is the Lancet, happened when the when this trust is violated. In this case, other researchers wasted resources on unnecessary follow up research, and people avoided the MMR vaccine, putting their children at increased risk of measles, mumps, and rubella. The third moral principle is seeking justice. So, researchers must conduct their research in a just manner, and they should treat their participants fairly, for example, by giving them adequate compensation for their participation and making sure that benefits and risks are distributed across all participants. For example, in a study of a new and potentially beneficial psychotherapy, some participants might receive the psychotherapy while others serve as a control group that receives no treatment. If the psychotherapy turns out to be effective, it would be fair to offer it to participants in the control group when the study ends. At a broader societal level, members of some groups have historically faced more than their fair share of the risk of scientific research, including people who are institutionalized, are disabled, or belong to racial or ethnic minorities. So, a particularly tragic example of this is the Tuskegee syphilis study conducted by the U.S. Public Health Service from 1932 to 1972. So, so before I am going to discuss about this study. I I would like to discuss what is syphilis. So, it is a chronic contagious, usually often congenital disease that if left untreated producing rashes, lesions, and many others. So, the participants in this study were poor African American men in the vicinity of Tuskegee, Alabama, who were told that they were being treated for bad blood. Although they were given some free medical care, they were not treated for their syphilis. Instead, they were observed to see how the disease developed in untreated patients. So even after the use of penicillin became the standard treatment for syphilis in the 1940s, these men continued to be denied treatment without being given an opportunity to leave the study. So the study was eventually discontinued only after details were made known to the general public by journalists and activists. It is now widely recognized that researchers need to consider issues of justice and fairness at the societal level. So today, the America does remember the hundreds of men used in that research without their knowledge and consent. The fourth moral principle is respecting people's rights and dignity. Researchers must respect people's rights and dignity as human beings, and one element of this is respecting their autonomy. Autonomy is their right to make their own choices and take their own actions free from coercion. So, of fundamental importance here is the concept of informed consent. This means that researchers obtain and document people's agreement to participate in a study after having informed them of everything that might reasonably be expected to affect their decision. Consider the participants in the Tuskegee study. Although they agreed to participate in the study, they were not told that they had syphilis but would be denied treatment for it. Had they been told this basic fact about the study, it seems likely that they would not have agreed to participate. Likewise, had participants in Milgram's study been told that they might be reduced to a twitching, stuttering wreck, it seems likely that many of them would not have agreed to participate in that study. In neither of these studies did participants give true informed consent. Another element of respecting people's rights and dignity is respecting their privacy. Their right to decide what information about them is shared with others. This means that researchers must maintain confidentiality, which is essentially an agreement not to disclose participants' personal information without their consent or some appropriate legal authorization. Remember, there are a wide variety of ethical issues arise in psychological research. Thinking them through requires considering how each of four moral principles, the weighing risk against benefits, acting responsibly and with integrity, seeking justice, and respecting people's rights and dignity, applies to each of three groups of people: the research participants, science, and society. So the point here is that although it may not be possible to eliminate ethical conflict completely, it is possible to deal with it in responsible and constructive ways. In general, this means thoroughly and carefully thinking through the ethical issues that are raised, minimizing the risk, and weighing the risk against the benefits. It also means being able to explain one's ethical decisions to others and seeking feedback on them and ultimately taking responsibility for them. The general moral principles of weighing risk against benefits, acting with integrity, seeking justice, and respecting people's rights and dignity provide a useful starting point for thinking about the ethics of psychological research because essentially everyone agrees on them. As we have seen, however, even people who agree on these general principles can disagree about specific ethical issues that arise in the course of conducting research. This is why there also exist more detailed and enforceable ethics codes that provide guidance on important issues that arise frequently. So, in this, we are going to look closely at the one that is most relevant to psychological research, that of the American Psychological Association Ethics Code. The APA's Ethical Principles of Psychology and Code of Conduct, also known as the APA Ethics Code, was first published in 1953 and has been revised several times since then, and most recently in 2002. But I have research about it. Parang na-revise again siya by the year 2017. It includes about 150 specific ethical standards that psychologists and their students are expected to follow. So much of the APA Ethics Code concerns the clinical practice of psychology, advertising one's services, setting and collecting fees, having personal relationships with clients, and so on. For our purposes, the most relevant part is Standard 8, research and publication. Although Standard 8 is reproduced here in its entirety, we should consider some of its important aspects: the informed consent, deception, debriefing, the use of non human animal subjects, and scholarly integrity in more detail. So, this is the APA Ethics Code. So, I will just explain this briefly since my group mate, Miss Yukor, will discuss it thoroughly. So, for the informed consent to research, when obtaining informed consent as required in standard informed consent, psychologists inform participants about first, the purpose of the research, second, expected duration and procedures, and their right to decline to participate and to withdraw from the research once participation has begun. Third, the foreseeable consequences of declining or withdrawing from the study. Fourth, reasonably foreseeable factors that may be expected to influence their willingness to participate, such as potential risk, discomfort, or adverse effects. Fifth, any prospective research benefits. Sixth, limits of confidentiality. Seven, incentives for participation. And eight, whom to contact for questions about the research and research participants' rights. So they provide opportunity for the prospective participants to ask questions and receive answers. In dispensing with informed consent of research, psychologists may dispense with informed consent only. First, where research would not reasonably be assumed to create distress or harm and involves A. The study of normal educational practices, curricula, or classroom management methods conducted in educational settings, and only anonymous questionnaires, naturalistic observations, or archival research for which disclosure of responses would not place participants at risk of criminal or civil liability or damage their financial standing, employability, or reputation, and confidentiality is protected, or the study of factors related to job or organization effectiveness conducted in organizational settings for which there is no risk to participants' employability and confidentiality is protected, or where otherwise permitted by law or federal or institutional regulations. And in deception in research, psychologists do not conduct a study involving deception unless they have determined that the use of deceptive techniques is justified by the study's significant prospective scientific, educational, or applied value, and that effective non-deceptive alternative procedures are not feasible. And the psychologists explain any deception that is an integral feature of the design and conduct of an experiment to participants as early as feasible. In the briefing, when psychologists become aware that research procedures have harmed a participant, they take reasonable steps to minimize the harm. And in humane care and use of animals in research, psychologists acquire, care for, use, and dispose of animals in compliance with current federal, state, and local laws and regulations and with professional standards. And psychologists must be trained in research methods and experience in the care of laboratory animals, supervise all procedures involving animals, and are responsible for ensuring appropriate consideration of their comfort, health, and humane treatment. In the reporting of the research results, psychologists do not fabricate data. So the psychologists avoid false or deceptive statements, and psychologists do not present portions of another's work or data as their own, even if the other work or data source is cited occasionally. So, no to plagiarism. And psychologists take responsibility and credit, including authorship credit, only for work they have actually performed or to which they have substantially contributed, and principal authorship and other publication credits accurately reflect the relative scientific or professional contributions of the individuals involved. Psychologists who review material submitted for presentation, publication, grant, or research proposal review respect the confidentiality of and the propriety rights in such information of those who submitted it. So, you can read the full APA ethics code on the link provided in this slide. Again, informed consent means obtaining and documenting people's agreement to participate in a study, having informed them of everything that might reasonably be expected to affect their decision. This includes details of the procedure, the risk and benefits of the research, the fact that they have the right to decline to participate or to withdraw from the study, the consequences of doing so, and any legal limits to confidentiality. So, note also that there are situations in which informed consent is not necessary. These include situations in which the research is not expected to cause any harm and the procedure is straightforward or the study is conducted in the context of people's ordinary activities. For example, if you wanted to sit outside a public building and observe whether people hold the door open for people behind them, you would not need to obtain their informed consent. These are my references. So that will be all for my report. And my group mate, Miss Lordette Eucor, will discuss more thoroughly the APA Ethics Code and putting ethics into practice.